So good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to our third webinar in the Literacy Open Doors series. So this webinar is Library Literacy Champions, making the library a welcoming place for everyone. So it's really great to see you all, and we've seen there quite a few people from across the country. So when we were designing the series, we really had in mind people who work for community and voluntary organizations. And of course, alongside that, people who work in community-based organizations. I suppose for us, it was trying to find the opportunity to share some great work that's been done around the country among organizations are really trying to make an effort to make their services, programs, groups more literacy friendly. And what we really mean by that is creating a space where if people are not confident with their reading and writing, that they will still feel welcoming and still be able to take part or avail of a service. So we are getting started today about the Dublin City's Library project, Library Literacy Champions. So you'll hear about that project, and this was led by Dublin City Libraries last year, but in partnership with ourselves and the National Literacy Agency. And this project was funded by the Adult Literacy for Life Collaboration and Innovation Fund. So that's what today's webinar will be all about. So firstly, myself, and I'm Derv Ryan, I'm a literacy development and outreach worker. I'll be just briefly introducing the project to give you some context. Next, we'll have a chat with our National Adult Literacy Agency Plain English Coordinator, Claire Reardon, about using plain English to create more literacy-friendly services. And finally, you'll hear from Esme Lloyd-Baldwin, who was one of the librarians that was involved in the library's Literacy Champions. And Esme is a branch librarian in Coolock Library. So she'll talk about her experience of participating in the project and any changes that they made after doing the project and how that's turned out for them in their library. So just to get started then, it's always good to start about what is literacy at all, because literacy is a big subject, and it's good for, I suppose, us in NALA to explain when we use the word literacy, what do we mean? And when we talk about literacy and adult literacy in particular, we really are talking about the range of skills. So it is about reading for sure, and it's about writing. And in writing, it can be spelling, it can be handwriting. You know, there is a spectrum when we talk about literacy. So often I think when people hear the word literacy, they think we're talking about people maybe that really don't have maybe any confidence at all reading words or writing anything. And that's really not the case. Sometimes, yes, unfortunately, there are people who didn't get the chance to learn those things and are starting from the very start. But there's also a broad range. There's people who have enough confidence in reading and writing to get by in their small day-to-day tasks, but maybe they've never read a book. Maybe they don't have confidence to take up a job that will require more reading and writing tasks. So we really are talking about a broad range of people that may not be confident in those skills. We're also talking about numbers and numeracy. So in NALA, we're looking at how that impacts day-to-day life, whether it's health literacy and taking your medication, dealing with your bills, dealing with your taxes and your payslip, all those broad range of tasks where we use numbers that can be quite challenging for many people. We also talk about speaking and public speaking, but also asking questions and having the confidence to have a conversation, whether that's with the service, such as the social welfare office, the library, a doctor's surgery, being able to communicate by listening and speaking and getting what you need information from those conversations to take action. So it really is a broad range of skills that we talk about. And of course, then we have digital literacy, which is a big challenge for many people, but those people that maybe are not as confident in their reading and writing would really struggle with the digital literacy layer that comes on top. And we're seeing this huge impact across Ireland, particularly after COVID, but it was coming, where a lot of information now is only being presented to people online, or there aren't many phone lines they can ring to get information, an alternative. And then sometimes the in-person service is being restricted and pulled back. And we're seeing things move online, which can be deeply challenging for people that struggle, both possibly with their reading and writing, and then also with using devices, computers, and going online. So it's just important that we start off that way, because I think sometimes when we talk about literacy, people think about either ends of the spectrum, but there's a whole lot of people in between that are not necessarily confident in all areas. For many of us, we might do a certain job for a long time or have a certain I suppose, role in our families and in life, which means we do certain tasks and we get really good at those. And if we're put into a new environment, or something happens to our health, for example, and we're thrown into this hospital with all this medical jargon, we can get very overwhelmed. So it's just good to keep that in mind when you're listening today to the speakers and any questions you might have. So just to introduce the project that was done last year, it was the Dublin City Libraries Library Literacy Champions project. And this project got a branch librarian from each of the Dublin City Libraries to come together to do 4 sessions of training. So we started off with literacy awareness training, and this is really the basics to get to understand literacy and become more aware of the issue in Ireland and how it impacts people. Then the group went on to do a series of plain English training, and Claire Reardon, you'll hear from in a few minutes, our plain English coordinator, delivered that training with the librarians. And that was to look at language in the library and how it could be made more, I suppose, plain English was used more effectively so that people would have a better chance of understanding something the first time they read it or the first time they hear it. And then we did an in-person literacy friendly workshop that kind of looked at all the range of things that could be done to create a more literacy friendly environment in the library. And finally, then they had a follow-up session, a feedback session, where people came together and say, what are the actions we can take now in our libraries? What are we bringing back? And what do we see now that can be changed to make things more comfortable for people? And just to say, I won't take credit for this project. I was not part of the delivery team. Our colleague Brona Conroy was the NALA person that was in part of the project, and the lead person on the project from Dublin City Libraries was Endalini, who is in social inclusion in the Dublin City Libraries. And we want to as well extend our thanks to Andrew Connolly, who's the Regional Adult Literacy Coordinator in Dublin City, who was also extremely supportive of the project. So we have some lovely pictures here of people in action about the project before you hear more about it. So we did have an online literacy awareness session before all the librarians came together. And I think that worked really well, having a mix of online and in-person trainings. And you'll hear from Esme about her experience of how she felt about that. But obviously, libraries are extremely busy. They're dealing with shortages, staff shortages, like in a lot of places. So it can be tricky for people to actually come together. But it seemed to work well that some of the sessions were in person and some were online. And then luckily, there was a lovely award ceremony as well that I suppose helped to create the milestone around the project, because I think it's really important that when people are involved in these projects, and it was voluntary, that they're commended for making that special effort and for taking an interest and a commitment, I suppose, to making sure things are more inclusive. So it was really great to be part of that, and Claire was part of that, and Esme. So I will finish up there for myself, and I think we'll move on then to have a chat with Claire. So Claire, like I mentioned, is our plain English coordinator and did the training sessions as part of the project. Hello, Claire.
Hi, Derv. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody here.
So Claire, I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
And you know, if anything else comes to mind, just interrupt me and go for it. But I suppose the first question I have here is, why is it important for community-based services and organizations to use plain English?
Oh, well, okay, great. Okay, starting off with the nuts and bolts. I suppose I think I'll start with the definition of plain English, because sometimes people hear it and they automatically think it's just about language elements. So the formal definition of plain English is communication is in plain English if its wording, structure, and design are so clear that the intended readers can easily find what they need, understand what they find, and use that information. Now, I'm reading that because it's the latest definition from the ISO standard on plain English, which is a relatively new standard. So it's about language, structure, and design, and finding, understanding, and using that information. So to then your question, Derv, why is it important that community and voluntary organisations and services use it? I suppose I think there's 3 reasons. One, it's going to help you as a staff member or as a volunteer to do your job more efficiently and effectively. If you provide information in plain English, or even if you can make something a little bit clearer for your customers, it's going to save you so much time. So, for example, we found that in one department in Arizona in revenue, their department, they rewrote one letter and using plain English guidelines, and they got 1,000 fewer phone calls. So it's going to really save you time. The second reason I would say is probably, it's the right thing to do, of course, and it's a way of ethically communicating with your customers, and they're going to notice. So when you walk in, say, to the Cancer Society of Ireland, you get a good welcome. Everything feels nice. You don't quite know what it is, but you're feeling very welcome. There's a trust built up. And then you sit down and you look around you and you see a sign. This building is, we use plain English here. We are a literacy-friendly building. So similarly with the document you're providing, or if you're speaking to someone, people can sense and they can get a good feeling if you're using plain language, plain English, which to them is something they can relate to. So plain English is something that your readers think is plain English. So that's always a good thing to remember. And then the final reason then that it's important is that, you're tight on resources in the community and voluntary sector. I worked there myself in Focus Ireland and in other organisations, and I know it's hard. So you will save money and save time and have fewer callbacks. Less to do if you invest just a little bit in plain English, and it doesn't take a lot, and pick something very small to improve and track the impact, and you will see the savings to your organisation, which will free up its time to do other things that your customers need, and it'll make your work better as well too. So for example, in Norway, in a county council, they were taking 3 to 6 months to get somebody an older person to get a bed in a place. Whereas when they revised their materials together and reduced the number of documents they had, that 3 to 6 month waiting period went down to 6 weeks. So there were huge cost savings there. So there's some of the reasons, I'd say, but start from self-interest and keep it tight, and then you'll see the benefits to yourself and then to your many customers. So I think, and to your organization. So, yeah.
Thanks, Claire. I think that's, and it's also, it sounds like a list of great arguments if you need to convince somebody in your organization of the benefits, or any, managers and things like that. It's great to have those arguments there. Can you tell us, Claire, maybe a little bit more about the plain English training that you delivered as part of this project with the libraries?
Yes. So as you mentioned, Gerald, I was following on the foot of my other colleague who had done the literacy champion training. So I was a bit nervous because she's very good and I hadn't done the training in a while, to be honest. I'm not usually the trainer. So I knew that the library staff were going to be, they're going to be good on the technicalities of language. They're going to know the punctuation. But still, I wanted to find out. So I started what they wanted. I started with the training needs analysis, and I literally asked them, what is it you want? And so the main thing that the 60 or 70 or so people that I was working with in the library services, they wanted to know how to simplify information quickly because they were under pressure. So I really focused on that, and I invited them to send me materials that they wanted me to look at and critique with their permission. So that the project then was very much customized to their needs, and I covered the core plain English guidelines. So again, we revisited who is your audience. So we'd look at things like that, a lot of people have more customers who don't speak English as a first language. So we kind of look at how reading in that situation could be 30% slower. So what are you going to do to make things easier to read? So we looked at a lot of their leaflets, a lot of their, for autism-friendly situations, membership forms, computer policy usage, signage, and so on. And we also did some work whereby I assigned some text to do in between time. and it is really important that the organisation gave them the time to do it. And then we looked at what they did in terms of applying plain English guidelines in the second session. We had 2 sessions for each group. So that's what we did, and it was very enlightening and very participatory, very great contribution from that group. Really, I mean that sincerely. So yeah, that's what we did, Derv.
Great. And was there anything that I suppose you learned from doing the training with a group like that with the librarians?
Okay, I think I learned really that I think it was more a reminder, the power of smart working, not in a technological sense, but this power of actually using your head and pairing up to, when you're short from time, work together to improve a particular document or a piece of text. Because you may be terrific at making something simpler, but you may not have a clue about, some formatting amends that could be very simple to apply, like bullet points, that your colleague may just go, oh, we could use bullet points there, and that would make it easier. So when you work together, the quality of your information and how clear it looks is done. It's faster and easier to improve it using the plain English guidelines. That was one thing. The other thing I learned is don't underestimate. Sometimes I forget, so I had to remember the impact a training session can have, even though it's short. The long-term impact can be greater. So that was really great for me. So there are 2 learnings, reminders I got.
Thanks, Claire. And I think, like you said, the working together, team working is a really good point. Like recently, I've had to work on a document, and having several fresh pairs of eyes on it has been, you just don't see the document anymore after you've read
Yeah,
it several times. You don't see it anymore. So
yeah.
yeah, it's a really good point. We're going to hear from Esme in a minute about, your experience, Esme, of the library project, and I suppose the impact maybe in your branch library. Claire, do you have any other organizations you've worked with, and you can mention them or not mention them, who use plain English and saw positive impact? You gave some examples there, but are there any that come to
Yeah,
mind?
sure. So we work with an array of organisations, from the DPP to county councils to other libraries to the Law Society, the Court Service, and so on. So I decided that I'd focus a little bit maybe on the Court Service initially, and then look very briefly at Dún Laoghaire Housing Department. So the Court Service, we did training with them, and again, they were very enthusiastic learners. With the staff there, we did lunch and learns. We did editing of text on the website, particularly the divorce section and the death section, and I was strongly encouraged to get input from adult literacy learners. So I got some input there, which was invaluable, because Mark was his name, was such a brilliant contributor. You don't see everything yourself, even though I am, a long time in plain English. So that was excellent. We helped them with video, the video on going to court, which was, great. There were others involved in that too. And they're now actually moving themselves, and they are now themselves championing plain English, and they're developing and will soon launch a 1-hour e-learning course for their staff. And they've got a lot of praise for the quality and clarity of their work, which is significantly improved in the papers and elsewhere. And the other example, I think it stemmed originally from successful literacy awareness training and work with Dún Laoghaire Library. And so I got in contact, or their housing department got in contact with me, and I audited their materials using plain English. I did the report for senior management, and then staff came together and we looked at a number of their letters, and we created before and after examples, after editing examples, so they could see the benefits. And then they tracked one example, which was of a tenancy document that was revised. And within 6 months, they got 15% reduction in maintenance requests. And this, when you bring it down to brass tacks, was 1,000 fewer, 1,000 fewer requests over a 12-month period, and that saved that particular housing department 23 days. So that was written up in the IPA good practice hand guide for housing as a case study. So they're just some examples, but we work with all types of organizations and all types of documents.
Great, Claire. I mean, that speaks for itself for sure. You know, that's a really, really important statistic. And I think you said it previously, if it's possible, because I know it can be
Yeah,
challenging to track or evaluate
yeah,
things, but
yeah.
it's brilliant because it's
Oh,
evidence you need for the
yeah.
future.
And the best, like the most renowned examples internationally is a book called Writing for Dollars, Writing to Please. And the latest edition came out last year, and it featured for the first time an Irish example, which was actually a Department of Health example. So it's great to see that achievement that can be done when you track something. Keep it tight, keep it small, because everyone's busy, but do it. It's worth it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. So the one thing that we've heard quite a bit is that community and voluntary organizations, obviously because they work on the ground and have direct contact with people, often they end up translating policy or legislative changes for community members. So say something happens in the budget and they need to know maybe more about their new entitlements and things like that. Do you have any advice about how organizations should go about this?
Yeah. Well, it can certainly be intimidating getting in those things because they're like often not written in plain English. They're struggling. So I'd say the first port of call is don't panic and head to Citizens Information, because their writers work every month to skill up in plain English, and they work very quickly to distill that kind of information that you're working on. So they will have it in plain English pretty quickly. Then there's revenue. Sometimes that can work very well in terms of the examples they use to show you how a benefit can impact on a family or an individual. Citizens information is perhaps immediately more accessible, but the examples in revenue can be good because they're often number-based, so I find that good. Try then and apply. Think, what are the main questions I'm going to be asked about this from my customers, and bubble those up and try and answer those. And remember that if you're in the family area, or if you're in a council, or if you're working on social prescribing or a health topic, there are others working on it too. So link in, and we do have a LinkedIn network for plain English, and say, listen, I'm trying to do this, have you done that and that? And then, you know, use each other. If you really have to get it out the door, increase the line spacing, make it look a bit less intimidating, put in a few subheadings and say, you can call us for further information, but try and get the main points to the top. So the main things that you need to know if you're an individual are 1, 2, and 3, make sure they're right. And if you have any time, get somebody else to check them. And the final point I would say that's useful is use plain English resources, such as our A to Z plain English guides to political terms, which sounds a bit unusual, but sometimes they are relevant, and our writing and design tips, which gives you health terms commonly used, and then the plain English alternative and other resources that we have. So there's some tips I would use.
Thanks, Claire. And I really, it draws back, like you said, to know what your, I suppose, service user or community member needs to know. And what you said
Yeah,
previously is show them or ask them, you know, if you have a couple of
yeah,
people you know well in the community or where you are, they might be able to give you feedback, like you said.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, plain English, you have the guidelines that you follow in terms of language structure and design. It does not replace the impact or the input of real people and their direct response. So if you have time, you could check with no more than 6 of them, because if you get more than 6, it's a lot of feedback. I'm not saying always just 6 or fewer, but you know, keep it tight because people are busy, and you'll get enough to improve the quality and clarity of your information. And yeah, and if we can help, please let us know, of course. So
Thanks.
yeah.
Thanks, Claire. And just lastly, if, you know, and like you've already mentioned this, you know, there is often organizations to have few resources and a low capacity to
Oh
make
yeah.
big changes. Like, is there anything you would say as a start if people really want to
Yeah.
make a start on plain English in the organization, what they should look at first?
Yeah, if it was me, I'd go to our website, nala.ie, and I'd enroll for the free webinars that we run. So we have 2 now before Christmas coming up on leaflets shortly, how to do leaflets. And then the other one is about writing online or for social platforms. So go there because they're free. Invest in, plan your budget next year so that you could fund somebody through our open plain English training. So it's like 130 or perhaps even less for somebody from the community and voluntary sector to go to a short plain English session, and it can actually be of great benefit and is usually of great benefit to people later. It's not going to fix everything, but I do that. And the other thing I do is I join the LinkedIn network that we have, because you can ask a question there, and building that up, you know, you will get support, you will get answers, and you won't feel alone. So that's what I would do, and keep it tight. Just do one thing at a time and do it well and show that it works. And you'll feel better, rather than going, we're going to revamp all our communications, because, you know, keep it tight and then it's going to go really well for you. Yeah, and have a little team to help you. Don't do it all alone. Yeah. So they're my tips.
Claire, that's brilliant. That's really helpful. I think a lot of people will find that very useful. Is there anything you'd like to add before we move on, or?
You see, I think the LinkedIn network is useful, because often I find people send me in the same thing. I get say a membership form, or I get say a local development plan, or I get a digital strategy, and I'm kind of going like, do they not know the others doing this? And you could actually, you know, knock heads and save effort all around. So I think templates across the community and voluntary sector would be useful. So if there was any way of collaboration, having literally a pen network, a plain English network for the community voluntary sector, you know, do it.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire. We appreciate that. And if you have any questions for Claire, we will take them at the end after Esme speaks. So do pop them in the chat, everybody. No worries, Claire. Esme. So
Hi.
it is your chance now to talk about how you really feel about the project.
Okay, so I have some slides here, so I'll just pull that up now. So that should be showing the slides. So yeah, it was a really kind of exciting project to be in. I've been in the libraries about 7 years now, and you know, like Claire said just at the end there, you come up against the same stuff again and again and again. And so having a really solid idea of how to just, I think one of the biggest things about the training, and I'll get more into this later, was the collaborative nature of it, and that really, really helped. So basically, yeah, Dublin City Libraries, we received funding from the Adult Literacy for Life strategy, and we staff were identified and volunteered to become library literacy champions. One of the things that was really, really valuable was, in the room we had library staff from all grades and of very different levels of tenure. So we had senior management who've been in for maybe 20 years. We had library assistants who've been in for 2, and a lot of variety in who was actually doing the training. The pictures that I've put up are all from libraries who took part in the training. So this is from Coolock Libraries International Literacy Day. We did a book display for it with a bunch of our different resources. So the training focused on raising awareness of literacy and literacy-friendly approaches among staff, enhancing the branch library services for adults with unmet literacy needs of all kinds, and supported awareness of adult literacy services. So one of the two biggest things that we did with the training was we were engaging directly with the adult literacy services through Andrew and the CDETB, and we were engaging with NALA for the sort of literacy awareness and plain English training. And I think working in libraries, but also anywhere in the kind of community sectors, you know that people have literacy issues, and you know that literacy issues are really wide and diverse, and you'll have someone who's very well spoken, who can probably read really well, but has a real mental block about what they can do on computers. And so suddenly even their English literacy drops when they're confronted with having to write something digitally. Or people who, I think one of the biggest problems that we had, and this came up and isn't something we've really been able to resolve yet, is libraries have changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, 20 years. But for people with literacy issues, libraries are almost an insurmountable barrier because they just think books, and they think books that I can't read. And so being able to talk to some of the adult learners that had gone through literacy training was really, really interesting. But one of the takeaways from, I think, the first session was a guy who was saying that he'd gone on a lot of courses with the ETBs in the last 5 years. He went from being barely able to read or write to doing all of these courses and training and feeling much more confident and writing in a book that got published. But he hasn't told a lot of people in his life that he's doing these courses, that he was facing these issues, and he still wouldn't go into a library because that barrier is there. And so being aware that we're not reaching everyone is really important. It was also really useful that we had the feedback and the peer support from colleagues who were also doing the program, and the support from the NALA and the ETB facilitators. So as Derv already said, the training schedule was, we had the literacy awareness training in person. So that was a chat from Brona and a chat from Andrew, and two of the adult learners came in to talk about their experiences, which was brilliant. And then we had the two plain English training sessions, which we did with Claire, and those were both online. And then I think it was about 2 months into the project, we did using a literacy friendly approach. So that was when we'd all had a bit of a chance to build stuff, to work on things, and we're able to so some people were coming and going, I've had this come up, and immediately someone else might have come up against it already. And then we had our follow-up and feedback session at the end, which was really important because a lot of the work from this is still ongoing. We finished it up maybe about 11 months ago, but actually we're all still doing that work. So staff received the training, which was really important. A lot of the stuff, particularly with plain English, it feels like things you should already know, but I think there's always something to learn and take away from it. The other thing that was really important was we all committed to an action, 1 to 3 actions that you could just do and complete. And that was really important because it meant you weren't going, okay, I have to open the doors, I have to find the people who aren't coming in, I have to update our stock, I have to do this, I have to do that. You were going, what's something I can do and achieve in the next month? What's one thing I can do that will get finished? And one of my colleagues created a Microsoft Teams channel for us to share ideas, projects we were doing, how we were getting on with our project, and advice and collaborate. So that's gone a bit quiet the last few months, but it's still there, and it's still a resource that I'd certainly pull on if I needed it. I think I'll talk about some of the actions that we did. So for me, when I started the training, I was in Drumcondra Library, which is a very small library. It's it's a reasonably affluent area. The demographic of the library is a lot of people who are big on their books and they're big on their reading. And we're also quite far away from any of the adult literacy services. So some of my colleagues were going out and getting regular visits and collaborations where they were going to the ETBs to have chats with the learners, and staff from the ETB were coming in to do information sessions in the libraries. That didn't really work for us in Drumcondra because our nearest groups were very far away. They were next to other libraries, so they were already collaborating with Ballymun Library and Central Library, and coming out to Drumcondra was a bit far. So we focused on updating our signage, I did a lot with the plain English training on our newsletter. So I tried to make sure that our newsletter incorporated as much plain English as we could. One of my other colleagues, she spoke to our IT department and installed one of our literacy supports, which is a touch type training course. They installed that on the public computers, which meant that anyone could access that coming into the library. And a lot of people were engaging with the ETBs. The other thing was, I think when we first started, we were all immediately saying that our quick read stock, our easy read stock was out of date. And rather than that be something that we each individually worked on, um, our bibliographic team knew that this training was happening, and they went out and they bought a lot of stock. So if I go back to the Coolock picture, we have big dyslexia friendly adult books, as well as our shorter reads or our abridged versions. And those are all brand new stock that we have in. And those are available through the national catalogue as well. If other libraries don't have that stock, it is out there in the catalogue. So I think some of the key takeaways for me were adoption of plain English guidelines and highlighting the literacy awareness. It takes time to do that. It takes time to write your newsletter and then rewrite it in plain English, but they can save you a lot of time in the long run. And when we were talking about when we were talking about this webinar, Claire asked if we'd gotten any feedback about our adoption of plain English, if I'd noticed any change. And the thing is, you'll know this from the community sector, you very rarely get positive feedback about stuff. You're much more likely to get your questions when something's wrong, or feedback that something wasn't clear. But I think it's important to just go, it is valuable, it is going to save you time. If you're doing it right, you'll get less queries and you'll probably get less negative feedback, even if no one ever comes to you and says, thank you so much, that made me able to use that newsletter, or I can use your social media posts now for information. Also making sure that any actions you do and take are useful for your work patterns. There's no plain English will support a lot of people across different areas, but if there isn't an adult literacy coordinator near you, or if that's not relevant to what your needs are, there's no point in just pushing ahead with that because that's what someone else did successfully. You need to know what works for you. So, one of my colleagues had someone from the CDTB come in and do information sessions in the library. Others just went and said, okay, we know what a library catalogue means. This is the picture in the bottom left. We know what a library catalogue means as staff, and we know what you can do. But if you aren't familiar with the system, if it's your first time in a library or you haven't been in a while, you might not recognize the words and go, okay, I can find a book with the catalogue. I can use the catalogue to register for the library today. So changing the signage to make sure that it can cut you down on questions. But there's a lot of things that you can do. I think engaging with stakeholders, as Claire said, asking people in your community to give you feedback is really, really valuable. So one of the things that's been going on, not as part of the Literacy Champions program, but aside to that, is a lot of the libraries, and both of the libraries that I've been working in have been working on making our libraries more autism friendly. And when I was in Drumcondra, we were working on building a social story and a visual guide for the library. And I knew that I had a couple of people in the community who could feed back to me on that. There's no point in doing a visual guide for autistic people if you don't check if it's actually useful. Otherwise, you're just building something that is going to take you a lot of time and energy to make, that isn't actually serving its needs. So making sure that you're focusing your limited resources, limited time, limited staff on the thing that's most important, and making sure that it's actually effective rather than just doing it to say you've done it and tick a box if it's not actually going to work. And collaborating with local groups. So your local libraries have a load of resources that are available. The education and training boards are doing a lot of stuff. So if you have someone who's coming in a lot and saying that they're having literacy issues or that they don't know how to use a computer, being able to know what resources you can refer them to in the community is really, really important. And on that note, here are some of our resources. So I've got a few library colleagues in the audience, but we have a lot of different supports and resources, and some of them are available in the branches and some of them are available online. So Dublin City Libraries, I think some of these are national, some of these are specific. We offer a variety of language learning workshops, as well as particularly the IELTS for people for whom English isn't a first language. A lot of our libraries have either language classes or exchanges. So Coolock has English classes that are run by the Northside Partnership, and that's a collaboration that we do with the Northside Partnership. So they provide the training that we don't have the training or the staff to provide, and we provide the space for them. The DCC libraries, we have reader pens which allow you to run it over text and it reads it out loud for people with literacy issues or dyslexia. And we have Acorn tablets, which are a age-friendly digital tablet for people who maybe want to get started on literacy or digital literacy and digital skills. And it provides them with a low effort access to sort of start learning that. As I said before, we've got the dyslexia friendly books for adults and children. We've got large print books and a lot of different types of audiobooks. And last but not least, we have trained staff who support the library users. So that's a lot of printing and that kind of thing. Digital support. It's one thing that I think is really important, came up a lot in the training, is it's really tricky because when you are as a library, as a voluntary or community organization, when you are a trusted resource to your community, you will get a lot of queries. And sometimes those are queries that you are not really equipped to deal with. We get a lot of people asking questions about, can we fill in this form for them? Can we sign up to them to revenue for them? There's a lot of needs that actually are really difficult for people to meet because of things like GDPR. So knowing how best to support people while not actually overstepping any of those boundaries is really important. And so I think, yeah, being able to, but I think referring someone to a library is is a useful thing, because we do our best to help show someone how to print, and ideally we're showing people how to do it rather than doing it for them, because that means that even if they have to ask us for help the next time and the next time, at least they're learning and they're building their own understanding of how to do that. So yeah, that's me. And that's I've got the email address there if there's questions afterwards they come up for you. One of the things I think is really important is this community collaboration. And so if something comes up afterwards, please do email me and ask any questions, but also you are welcome to ask questions now. I think, so I'll hand back over to Derv and I'll stop sharing there.
Thanks, Esme. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for your insights. And it is because libraries and many services and organizations are so busy, it's so rare sometimes to actually hear from people on the front line about the work.
Yes.
So thank you. We know you were very busy at the moment, so thank you so much for that. Please, like Esme said, do pop your questions into the chat if you have any, or just speak on the microphone. Please feel free to do that. And obviously your questions can be for Esme and Claire. So if anybody has any burning questions about the project, please do ask. We'd really encourage questions. before we hear maybe from other people there, I just wanted to ask, I suppose, as we mentioned there that, you know, you're 11 months, so it was around this time year that the project, the
Yeah.
training was taking place, which is kind of incredible to think so fast. And you said it was ongoing. You mentioned some things there, but I suppose, what do you think how have people remained motivated or committed? Because it can be very hard. You run a training, everybody's really up for it.
Yeah.
And you all go your separate ways and you move on to day-to-day stresses and work pressures. So how do you what do you think was different about this that it kept going?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that was very tricky was in the middle of this. So back in June, July, we had a big organizational shuffle. So I moved from Drumcondra to Coolock, and um, that meant that we a lot of people had to kind of drop projects when they moved. Um, I think it. I think one of the things was the nature of the collaboration. So even just getting the presentation ready, I was emailing a couple of colleagues and asking if I could use the pictures that they'd put up. So often, particularly when you're in a library, you're in your library and you do your work and it feels like it goes nowhere, or it feels like it goes to your community, but you're doing it a little bit into a vacuum because it's so hard to get that feedback from anyone. And I think what was nice about this was being able to share something somewhere and have colleagues go, "Oh, I really like that," or "Oh, could you send me that poster or that advice?" Um, it meant that there was a sort of peer-to-peer network that we could build on, and I think that really helped. I think having the training over that spread of time, and I think so we had the 6 sessions that we did between September to December last year. And then earlier this year, we had a sort of celebration and award, and where we got certificates at the Mansion House. But I think that kind of kept it going by not having it all just you're doing your plain English training today, and then you finish it and you do it and good luck. The idea of ongoing projects was kind of built into the way the training was done.
Yeah, no, and that it does come across very strongly. Like you said, the Mansion House, you know, the award ceremony, the certificates, like the milestone being recognized and acknowledged, the commitment and effort that
Yeah.
was made by each of the staff members. Um, it was voluntary, like you mentioned as well. Like it really has to be said, because I do think it's motivating is when people feel like they're doing a good job and they're making a difference. And I think a lot of people that work in community-based services organizations, that is the motivation, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's really good to hear. And I think what you said there so important as well, doing the actual how-to technical training, like literally, how do I do something? How do I do this? And then having those workshops, those open conversations. Okay, I tried to do something. This happened, or
Yeah.
I had this barrier, and what do I do now? Yeah, I think that you explained that really well, Esme. Thank you for that. We have a question. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Was there a positive response from library visitors to have access to and this is an acronym,
Yes.
TTRS, on public
So
computers,
it's
and how was it offered?
so
Can you
that's
explain what
a
TTRS is as well, just for
yes.
the rest of
And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to double check that I have it right now.
us?
Because I know yes, okay, so it is. It's touch type read and spell. So it's a typing system. And so the way that it's currently offered with Dublin City Libraries is four of the libraries, I think Coolock is one of them, have access to a certain amount of licenses and we sign people up when they request it. Um, so there was a positive response, and I think I so that actually wasn't rolled out across all Dublin City Library computers because it has to be installed. We're in the middle of updating the PCs at the moment. There's always something. But I think Donamead found it really useful. It meant that because they weren't one of the libraries that has the licenses, it meant that when they got queries about whether there was whether this was an option, they could just refer someone to one of their PCs. So it was publicized locally for them. It was something that we were working on in Drumcondra before I left, and I'm actually going to follow up again now with my successor there. just to remind him about it. But I think actually we don't do a lot of that, but having those kind of online resources available on the public computers in the libraries is really handy, because it means you can show someone in the library as well, rather than going, here's your license, take it off, go home and good luck. You can show them in the library and get them started, and that means that there's a higher chance of them continuing on with it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, that sounds really interesting as well. Just, I think, to keep in mind that like, you know, different libraries are at different stages of implementing all the systems, and it takes a long time, I suppose, to get that consistently across all branches. Yeah, and buildings are very different.
Buildings are very, very different. That's one of the things. Is Drumcondra Library is one room. It's a single room. Everything's just there, and so you can see everyone. You can point to everything. Whereas Coolock is much, much bigger, and it's harder to kind of keep track of. And so you have libraries specifically have a real issue with signage, where you want to have as many signs up as possible so people can understand what's happening in each corner. But if you're somewhere small like Drumcondra, that's massively overwhelming for people to come in somewhere. And it's just, so you have to really strike that balance. And that's a big thing with the plain English as well. But I think one of the other things is consistency across organizations. Is it can be really tricky sometimes to share something that you're doing with colleagues and go to email out and go, listen, this is something I'm doing. I'd like if you could come on board with it. But that's also really important, because if you have somewhere where one person is consistently using plain English and checking readability statistics for their social media posts, and someone else is just firing stuff up, that inconsistency can be really off-putting to people. So sometimes it's really important to make sure people are on the same page, but also, if you're in a library, to make sure you're not duplicating work. So if someone does a sign for a catalogue that actually works really well for them, just taking that first step to share things with your colleagues and go, this is something I've done, please use it if you want, is also really important. That's, yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds like both yourself and Claire, you emphasize this with the LinkedIn network, that network piece of like having people to go to, and people are, you know, somebody else somewhere is trying this too. It does seem to have a bit of I suppose sustainability in the piece, because it just means that people have support, and you're kind of interested, then you can get into it a little bit. Oh, this worked, this didn't. And it's a bit more, I suppose, exciting as well to be involved with something that has impact beyond your location or your branch. And it just strikes me that it could be something that could be done in other organizations that have branches, or, you know, are spread, for example, like housing organizations, like Claire, you mentioned you used to work in Focus Ireland, you know, like anywhere where there's more than one location. It could be interesting for people to develop a small group around this, whether it's literacy friendly services or inclusion or whatever.